So a safe harbor statement I want to read out. Both the speaker and host, we are organizing this meetup in individual capacity only. We are not representing our employers here. Today's presentation is strictly meant for learning purpose only. We don't hold any responsibility that same solution will work for your business requirements also. We need to learn from Mary. Yes, she's gonna share her knowledge and everything, but that will be only for learning purpose. You have to analyze your business requirements and take the decisions accordingly for your business use cases. Today's presentation is not meant for any promotional activities. Next slide, please, Mary. So thank you so much for joining with us, Mary, today and blessing us with your presentation. Uh, it's a great opportunity for the community to learn from your experience. Thank you so much for doing this, Mary. Over to you.
Thanks, Niraj. So first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever part of the world you're joining in. Thank you so much for making time to join this session. And thank you, Niraj, for inviting me. It's really a pleasure really happy to meet, people from the other side of the world. So for those who don't know me, I'm Mary Joy Sabal. You could call me Joy. I work as integration practice lead for Datacom New Zealand. So I'm originally from Philippines. I am now based at Auckland, New Zealand. I speak during MuleSoft Connect and Partner Kickoff, and I contribute to MuleSoft blogs as well. I'm one of the co-leaders of Wellington, New Zealand, and I'm currently leading 9 MuleSoft developers. So yeah, that's about me. Next.
That's so great.
Cool. Thank you. So today we're gonna talk about the caching strategies, or not only the caching strategies, but the caching of MuleSoft. So first is I'm gonna discuss about the caching concept for those who don't know about the caching, and it's important to know what should we cache. And we're gonna split into two after that. One is the caching policy in API Manager, and I squeeze in on how to secure your caching key by using header injection policy. And then, to not be overwhelmed. So I'm gonna squeeze in a demo after that. And then the next section would be about the caching process, like what's really happening behind the scene when we cache in MuleSoft. And then we're gonna see the cache scope as well at the API implementation level. Then after that, another demo. And of course, the benefits and key takeaways for this session. Cool. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat box, or you could enable your mic. It's okay. So don't be shy. For those new here, feel free to fire any questions. We're gonna appreciate it. And of course, after the session, you're gonna receive a survey form, and it's really important for us, to better ourselves, and what to do for the next presentation. So yeah, going back to the topic. So what is caching? So I've got this from the web, and I think this is one of the best description or diagram for the caching. So for example, you've got multiple users or multiple API consumers that's accessing the same resource. Without caching, it's just retrieving the same resource from the downstream service or from whichever data source, and then come back to the user with the response. So with the caching, with multiple users, so first one user is gonna retrieve the same resource, and then we cache it, and the second time another user gonna retrieve the same resource, then it's gonna retrieve from the cache. So it's not gonna go back to the downstream service. So yeah, so basically that's how caching works. So subsequent requests. So what should we cache? It's really important to know this because if it's good fit on your use case. So any resource that via HTTP GET or connect, and if we're trying to access a static data, and then the resources that's not frequently change, or not often changing it. So yeah, basically static, and then if it's not been changed a lot. So those are the things you have to consider when you're gonna use caching. And also when you're experiencing performance issues with your HTTP GET or connect. And also, for example, another um, scenario would be if the downstream service has a throttling applied. So you've got limited calls with the downstream service. So in that way, in that case, you have to apply the caching in the MuleSoft API. Cool. So first part I'm gonna talk about is the HTTP caching in the API gateway policy. So for those of you who are using the API manager, so API manager is our defense wall for our API. So here we apply the securities, we govern our APIs. So one of the policies in API Manager, starting from Mule version 4.1.0, is the HTTP caching policy, and it falls under the quality of service category. So in here, you'll see that there are versions there for the HTTP caching. So if you want to know what each version offers, you just go to MuleSoft Docs release notes, and this is a snapshot of the configuration detail of that policy. So I think it's better to talk about the what each of the details are for here. So the HTTP caching key, that's your key. So it's a key value, right? So key is where, for example, your request path. For example, you're filtering by date. So if that date always returns the same response, then you're gonna use that date as your caching key. So the expression is turned on for this HTTP caching key. So it's the same as you apply for your data weave. So in here, I've used the request path plus the query params. And then the maximum cache entries, from the word itself, is the maximum entries you could put in your caching. And the time to live is the expiration, and this is count as seconds. So time to live is when the resource is gonna expire in the cache. And then distributed. So distributed, when you are having multiple workers, mule workers, or nodes. So from the load balancer, it hits the load balancer. Then if it's turned on, if it's enabled, then it's gonna share that across all the mule workers. If not, then each worker has its own in-memory storage. So it's not shared across all the workers. And then persistent cache. So this one is using the object store. So object store is a facility of Mule where we store, the data. And so if it's persistent or transient, it's not in memory. So we're saving it in the disk. So the in memory. So persistent is when even if you restart, your data is still gonna live, still gonna be there because it's outside of your mule worker. If it's in memory, once you restart, it's gonna be lost. So that's what persistent is. And then I'm not sure about follow HTTP caching directives, But yeah, and then the conditional request caching expression. So you're just gonna filter out what are the methods that you're gonna cache. So for example, like what I've said, if it's a get or connect, then you could define that here. And the conditional response caching expression is your HTTP response codes. So you're telling the cache, okay, so if the response has the 200 or four response codes, and if it's a get, then cache it. So those are the details per yeah, for the configuration of caching policy. So I will show you later during the demo. Cool. So when we talk about the caching in MuleSoft, we've got two things. One is cache miss, and the other one is cache hit. So this is what happening. So once we hit the API gateway, the API manager. So if the 1 second. So yeah, the client user sends a request to an API, and then the request proceeds through other policies in the policy chain before reaching the HTTP caching policy. So that's the policy A. And then the HTTP caching policy checks if the request is already in the object store. So this part here at the bottom is the object store. And if not, the cache miss process is initiated. So if it's not existing, then that's cache miss. And then the next step would be the request continues throughout the chain of other remaining policies, which is the policy B. And then the backend response, and the response travels back through the policy chain. The response reaches again the HTTP caching policy, and caching hits the object store again and attempts to save the key of the request for later reuse. So we're using key value pairs for the object store. So the response continues through the remaining policies in the policy chain. So that's the cache miss if it's not cache yet. So next is cache hit. For the cache hit, the client sends a request. The request crosses other policies before reaching the HTTP caching policy. So the HTTP caching policy verifies that the request is already existing in the cache. So if the key is already there in the object store, then the key is found and stored response is returned. So what you've got there in object store, you just throw it back, and the response continues through the rest of the policy chain until it reaches the last one. The cache response is returned to the client. So that's for the cache hit. All good? So if you have any questions, yeah, feel free to ask.
Few questions, Mary. So
Mm-hmm.
Atul Jamit is asking, can this caching policy work below Mule version 4.1?
No, it's only available from 4.1.0.
Okay. Uh, Fatima is asking a question. Caching uses object store under the hood. I think you have already answered it.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
it is.
Zeno is asking if someone can send me the architecture for caching, I would appreciate. I think this is the architecture of caching, right? That he can
Yeah,
use.
for the policy, yes.
Okay. Uh, yes. Abhay is asking one question. Having query param in caching key in API manager policy will lead to many objects. Your question is a little bit unclear, Abhay. If you can
You mean
rephrase it.
many keys, like many records, many entries?
Does order of policies impact caching policy? Means caching policy should be the last for best practices?
It depends. So later with the header injection policy, I will show you what should be the first one. So it depends. You could sort it for which order. It's fine.
Uh, Anurag is asking one question. How cache is getting synchronized to database? If data is in database changes, how it got replicated to cache table?
It's not replicating it. So like what I've said, you have to consider cache if the data is not, frequently changed. But if you want to, for example, if you're aware that there's a change in database, you could invalidate the cache and then, you know, retrieve the fresh record or the latest record. But no, it's not talking to the database.
Thank you for that,
Like
Mary.
syncing, it's not syncing to the database.
Thank you for that, Mary. Zeno and Fatima, they are asking one question. How caching works on standalone servers?
The standalone server, because this is a policy, so you have the API manager, right? So the standalone, you mean you've got the runtime plane, right? And then you've got the API manager on the control plane. So it's still fine to I know it supports different deployment model. So that's gonna
Awesome.
be in one of the benefits of caching.
Awesome. Rajiv is asking a question. How caching ensures the data is latest from the database? Is it because of time to live or something else, Mary?
Um, Actually, it's not gonna know. It doesn't talk to the database. So, for example, if your database, gets updated after an hour, then you could set your, time to live less than an hour. Does that make sense? So, in that way, you invalidate the cache, and then once there's a request comes in, it's gonna retrieve the fresh copy from the database.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Mary. Srinivas is asking a question. How frequently the cache miss would be executed? Will there be any time limits around that?
So how frequent the cache miss, as long as your I'll just step back a bit. As long as your HTTP caching key detects that it's unique, then it will initiate the cache miss.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So for
Pranav
example, if
asking.
you query first a different date, then it's gonna initiate the cache miss, and then the next request a different date, then it's gonna initiate. So for every new request.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Mary. Let's proceed with the presentation.
Cool. So, all right. That's for the HTTP caching policy. So on to the next API manager policy called header injection. So the category for this is transformation. So whereas the HTTP caching is for quality service. And the minimum mule version for this is again 4.1.0. And it adds HTTP headers to the request or response of a message. So there's an opposite of header injection, which is header removal policy. Cool. So this is like my own exploration only, because I've got this requirement that we're doing a cache, but we cache it based on the person's identity. So it's for the credit check of the person. There's um, no unique ID apart from the transaction ID. And then the client wants to, or the business wants to cache the transaction ID, first name, middle name, and last name, and then birth date. But these details are quite private, sensitive. So when you go to the runtime manager and then go to the object store, you will be able to see the key like in a plain text, but not the value, because value is binary. So the business like, we don't want to expose the first name, middle name, the birth date, last name. So we want that encrypted. So I was like, okay. So first thing comes to my mind is to utilize the data wave to, to hash that detail. But I was trying to do that in the HTTP caching key. So if you see here on the right, but unfortunately, for some reason, it's not working. So I've opted to try the HTTP header injection policy. So I've used the crypto library and then hash the transaction ID, the combinations of the unique key, and then I've assigned that to a key which I called applicant key, and then from there I was using the applicant key as my caching key in the HTTP caching policy. So order of policies. So here it is. So for here, it's very important to know how you're gonna order the policy. So first is I want to encrypt the the key, and then next is the HTTP caching. So here, yeah, as you can see, header injection first and then HTTP caching. So side fact, the only API policy that you can't sort or can't order is CORS, CORS. So yeah, the rest is, you could reorder it. So that reason is actually based on my use case. But in your use case, it's up to you. But yes, you could reorder the HTTP caching policy. All good? All right. So now let's proceed to the demo.
I think we lost your screen sharing, Mary.
Yep, I'm just resharing. Yep.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we
All
can
right,
see that.
cool. All right, so do we have any questions at the moment before I proceed?
No questions as of now.
All right, awesome. Okay, I'm just opening
One
one
question
tab.
from up there. Is caching policy available in Mule free account, the trial account?
I'm using a trial. Yeah, I'm using a trial. So yeah, you could use that. You could play around that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so in here I've got an API that's what this API does is it's retrieving the time zone details, because I can't, I don't have much time to build my infrastructure with the backend. So I just check from the web what's the API, that's free and public. So here it's retrieving the time zone. That's it. It's very simple. So for the for yeah, just being time conscious, I've already set up. So my API is here and it's managing by the API manager. And then in my policies, I'll show you. So I've set it up. So first is the header injection key. So here, I'm hashing the request path. So my request path is, okay, first I'll go to the exchange to show you what the contract is. All right. Yeah, so I've got this endpoint, continent and state. So for example, Europe and London. And then the responses here, I've got cache control and expires. So in your design center, by the way, so in your design center, there's pre-built caching fragment that you could use. So fragment is a portion of API specification. So I just added that as a dependency. So you just go to your Exchange dependencies and add this. So you just add that, search for, the trait, cacheable trait, And then from here, it's gonna show up, and then you just have to add that here on your API specification, and then call that here. So in that way, this part will gonna populate. So it provides you a very, good description of what each header does. Yeah, going back to Exchange, so once you design, the API, then publish it to Exchange. So I've got this contract, so it returns this payload. Yeah, that's it. So now it's deployed to Cloud Hub, and it's managed by the API manager. So I'm talking the full API lifecycle now. So here in the header injection, I've got again this crypto hash width. So by the way, you could actually use any hash keys you want. Oh, in my case, I'm using the SHA256. So here you could use MD5, SH1. Yeah, so these are the available algorithms. Yeah, feel free to jump into MuleSoft docs. It gives you very detailed description. So I've used the SHA256. And then, so again, it depends that on your technical governance of Mule on what should be the algorithm. And then I've got here the HTTP caching. So yeah, I've got maximum entries of 10,000, and then time to leave for like 6 seconds. And I've disabled the distributed because I'm using one worker only. I think it's limited with my trial count. And then the persistent is yeah, so I'm not saving it in persistent object store. And this is the conditional. So if it's a get or head, then return it. And then the conditional response caching is 200. So by the way, if you want to apply, so just apply new policy here, and then you would be able to see the HTTP caching. So it's disabled because I've already have it. But yeah, and if you want to know if which Mule version, just you could, check it here in the drop down and the categories. So that's what I was talking about earlier. So it's falling under the quality of service and header injection for transformation. All right. So now I've got my API running in Cloud Hub. I've got my policies in place. So now let's hit that API. I'm just going to share my advanced REST client. So before that, I will enable the logs. I will open the logs. So here in Runtime Manager, there's an object store as well. So once you initiate the cache miss, then this is gonna have a value. And then if you try to fire a subsequent request for the same request path, then it's gonna retrieve the value here. All right. So let me just fire my advanced REST client. So I'm querying the time zone for Asia, Bangkok. All right. All right, so I've got the response here. Just gonna hang on. Let me just disable.
So no worries, maybe.
Yeah. So let me just wait for a bit until, because I disable and enable the HTTP caching. you should be able to see that the policy has been applied. I'm not sure why it's not showing here though. Am I hitting the correct endpoint? Yes. Hmm. Yeah, bear with me. I'm just gonna restart. Yeah.
This
So
is
while
getting
it's restarting,
yeah, any other
sorry.
questions? Anyone while this is getting restarted? Any questions? Renu is asking one question, Mary. Can explain a difference between policy A and policy B? What are they representing in that flow?
Is that the cache miss diagram that I've showed earlier? Yeah, so you won't be able to see that here, but that's actually what's happening behind the scene. So you won't be able to see the policy A and policy B because that's, umbrella in the API gateway.
Yes, that's what he's asking. Cache hit and miss. Yes.
Yes. So you won't be able to see the policy A and policy B here because it's happening under the hood. Cool. Any questions?
That was the only question which was pending, Mary, I think. Anyone else has any questions? Yes, Shivangi is asking one question. If we have multiple
All right.
resources, can we cache the particular resource?
Yes. So you could apply that in the resource level. So in here, if you hang on, so edit. So here you could apply for a specific method. Yes, you could do that. In my case, I've only got one endpoint, so that's why I apply to all API methods. Yeah, but definitely you could do that.
Thank you for that, Mary.
All
Any other
right. So
questions?
go ahead.
I think we are good till now. No other questions.
Yeah, awesome. So I could see that the header injection policy here has been applied. Yeah, so if you change something, just wait for a bit. It will show here in the logs.
This is still deploying, Mary.
Trying to see this applied, the HTTP caching policy.
I
Let
see.
me try to fire it, even if I don't see it.
Or maybe, Mary, we can, proceed with the presentation and we can try this one more time in the end, like based on your
Yeah,
comfort.
just checking. I'm just trying. Yeah, that HTTP caching. Oh, hang on. Let me try one.
Yeah, sure, Mary. No worries. Anyone
All
has
right.
any questions, any comments, please, type in your questions. Mary would be able to answer it.
Yeah. So just be mindful when assigning a policy under the for a specific resource, because you have to include the slash API, because if not, then it's not going to be applied for that specific resource. There's a MuleSoft forum about that. You could check it out. Because yeah, I've encountered an issue with that. So just slash API and then your base path.
So one question, Mary, from Sudhir. Cache can be achieved in Studio or runtime without any policy?
Yes. So that's what I'm gonna talk about later. It's the cache scope. All right. You could invalidate forcefully, or you could wait for the time to live to expire. Yes. Okay. So I can see it now. Applied policy, HTTP caching. So now let's try. Send again one more time. If not, then I'll proceed to the next. Yeah. Okay. So this is what happens. At first I configured it as I disabled the persistent, so I wasn't able to see it. So now I've got this HTTP caching, and now I'll send the subsequent requests. Yeah, I'm just not sure why it's not showing the keys here. Yeah.
So
Anyway, I will check later. Sorry about that.
no
So if
worries,
you
no
want
worries
to
at all,
if
Mary.
you want to apply the policy to a specific resource, then we usually specify the method and the relative path, right? What do you mean by adding slash API? So in my case, I'm not sure if this varies if you are using the API manager, or yeah, if it is infrastructure related. So when you go to these part here, yeah, when you go to this part here, then if you select this one, so you would be able to see what's my caching policy, right? Yeah, something like that. And you would be able to see, I don't know, what's the continent. It should be actually a preview resource matching. So I've got this preview resource matching here. So it's the match, but it's not working. So I had to add this API, something like that. So that's what I've noticed when I was using this HTTP caching policy. So you have to add that API. I don't know what's the reason behind that, but yeah, that's when it got work. Cool. So yeah, next. Hang on, let me just stop sharing. All right. Mm, okay, share. Oh, cool. So can you see now my presenter mode? Yeah, all
Yes, we
good. I
can
can
see
see it
it.
now. Yeah. All right. So now the next section would be the caching at the API implementation level. So somebody asked that. So we've done with the API gateway. And then the next section is this. So, but first, before we talk about the cache scope, let's define what's the difference between a non-repeatable and a repeatable stream, because this is yeah, I'm building up the discussion with the cache scope. So non-repeatable is you could read payload only once, and the repeatable is you could read the payload more than once. So if you notice this configuration in your Mule, in your Anypoint Studio, then that's what I was talking about. But I'm not gonna discuss further more about streaming because that's one big topic as well. So maybe some other meetup. Yeah, but this is the difference between a non-repeatable and repeatable stream. Okay. Cool. So now this is the caching process of Mule. So I built this diagram to make it, easier to understand. So the API consumer here, the bottom sends a request, and then there's a Mule API that's going to process the transaction within cache scope. And then, so this is the conditional caching. So is cache control equal to no cache? So if it's yes, then just generate response. Don't do anything. Don't do any caching, and then return the response. If no, then it is payload repeatable. So this is happening inside the cache scope. So is payload repeatable? If it yes, then it will generate the key. So the generation of key, I'll talk about a bit later. And then this is the, that policy A in the API gateway. So it says, oh, is it existing? Then is the key existing? Yes. So actually it should be, yeah. So yes, cache, and then saves response in the object store, which is the cache miss. And then no, if it's a cache hit. Actually, if it's not existing, then cache miss. And then if it's existing, then cache hit. So I have to rephrase that. Is the key not existing? And then once it's if there's a key in the object store, so the top level is what's happening in the object store v2, then generate the response and then return that to the API consumer. So that's the caching process of MuleSoft. All right, cool. So now, all right, should I answer questions? All right, no caching. That's if we implement caching. So if we implement caching in Anypoint Studio, do I have to skip setting up caching on any point platform? I think because in the cache scope, there's a generate key mechanism. So in the generate key, we've got three options. So one is, hang on. So I will talk a bit later about that. I have slide for that. So it offers a different, for me, different service offering. In the API manager policy level, you've got the request path, right? So that's gonna be based on the request path. So in the cache scope at the API implementation level, even if it's not a request path, even if it's a payload, so yeah, even if it's whatever. So there are different offerings between the two. So I haven't got a chance to have both, like in the API manager policy and the implementation level. So it's a case-to-case basis. Yeah, like what Neeraj said, depends on the use case. So we are using in-memory cache in a flow, and also we are using multiple replicas. It is not behaving as expected. Is there any better solution in the scenario? It's not behaving. We're using. What's your expectation like to be shared that across in the Mule workers? If that's your expectation, then you have to enable the persistent, persistent cache so that it could be shared across multiple workers or replicas. Right, cool. So that's for the caching process, and now we've got the caching strategies. So the default is to store it in memory. So that's not persistent. And then the default key is it uses the SHA-256 key generator to generate a unique key if you set that as the default. So what happens now with the caching strategies if you want it to be customized? So you've got option to customize. In here, so you're gonna click a reference to a strategy. But before that, you could see here there's a reference, right, for the object store, and it's set to none. So you have to add the object store module in your Anypoint Studio because by default it's not there. So you could grab it from the exchange. There's an object store for Mule3 and Mule4. So add that as a dependency and then or as a module. And then in the event key, so this is what each of the detail means. So for the event key, so that's a default, and then the second is the key expression. So that's when you could use the data you could utilize. For example, you've got a specific key you want to use. So if it's coming from attribute header, if it's coming from the payload itself. And then the key generator is when you use the Java. So if you have like a Java code that generates a key, then you could use that here in the key generator. Cool. So conditional caching in the same Mule properties. So there's a filter option there at the bottom. Then here you could specify if the cache control is is not equal to no cache. So then yeah, process it. So yeah, all right. So now cache scope demo. Stop sharing. I'm just gonna bring up my Anypoint Studio.
Any other questions before we move to demo? While Mary is preparing her screen.
All right. So I prepared a very simple flow. Just opening. All right. So here, the request comes in, and then I've got here the cache scope. This is what I was talking about. So in so I strategy, and then yeah, so I've got here my object store. So by default you don't have this, so just search it in Exchange and import it, and then add my object store here. So in here I've set up 100 maximum entries and then time to live 6 seconds. So this is my configuration. I've enabled the persistent cache as well. So once I've got that, I will set up my caching strategy here. So I've used my object store, inherit that, and then my key expression would be just the raw request path. So that's it. And for the advanced configuration, let me just open up. Okay, so for the response generator, can you see the caching strategy window?
Yes, Mary.
No. All right,
Yes.
cool.
Yes.
Awesome. For the response generator for your strategy, this is a reference to a Java object that is used to create the responses returned by the caching strategy. So if you again have the Java code that you want to implement for the response, then use the response generator here. So the event copy strategy is for mutable or immutable data. So we're not gonna configure that. So it's just very simple configuration. All right, so back to the here. So I'm just gonna run this. So again, this is my oops, I hope I didn't change anything. So again, back to the world time API. So I'm retrieving again the what do you call that? The time zone, and then setting it as response. That's it. So question, difference between cache scope and object store. So object store is Mule facility to store the any data. So the cache scope is just utilizing the object store. It uses that as, as mechanism to cache the data. So does that make sense? So what we cache is we store in object store. Yeah.
Correct.
Well,
Thank you for that, Mary.
right. I think I better share my REST client so you could see um, the response time.
Sure,
Yeah.
Mary. We can
Right.
see
I'll
you
let you
well.
know. Yeah. I don't know. It's taking time. My studio and everything from my machine. Maybe it's morning, so
I
everything's
think your
loading.
machine, I think your machine did not have a coffee yet.
So if you use caching with object store, then we won't need to set or retrieve keys like object store. We do need that. So if it's a cache hit, then you have to retrieve the keys from the object store because that's where you store the data. So you need to have a key value pair. Yeah. So each request has its own key. Is
Sounds
there a
good.
way to implement caching using third party? Yes. Actually, that's a good question because one of my colleagues, they're using RTF, Runtime Fabric, and they're having issues with the HTTP caching policy of Mule because I think there are multiple resources accessing the key, updating the key, and then what do you call this? So the clustered is on. So runtime fabric in a clustered mode environment, and they were having issues. I think it's locking or they're getting inconsistent data. I can't remember. So they get rid of the HTTP caching and they use the Redis yeah, you could use that. If you don't use object store, does automatically created or in memory? So by default, it's in memory. But if you restart, then it's gonna be lost. Yeah. All right. So it's deployed now. Hang on. What? Probably I'll go for Europe and then London. The first request, I'm getting this 1924 milliseconds. Second request, so I'm just checking the logs. Okay, cool. And the next request, it's down to 212.06. So that's a big difference of the performance of caching. Actually, I'll have to turn this off. So Asia, let's try it again. Singapore. Yeah, 300 down to 78 milliseconds. So see the difference if you use the cache, like it's quick. The performance is quick. So that's pretty much with the cache scope. It's just very simple use case for the cache scope. So do you have any questions with the cache scope, guys, before I proceed?
Please feel free to type in your questions in the chat window. So Rajiv is asking a question: is performance more within within memory scope than object store?
Of course, persistent is taking much more of the performance. Yes, but it's your data is safe
It's like your
unless
trade-off,
you
Mary.
delete.
What you are gaining, what you are losing. It's like a trade-off.
Yeah, it's a trade-off. So if you're using a persistent, then you're confident that your data, is still gonna be there if in case that there's a restart or a crash. But if you delete it, then of course it's gonna be gone as well. Yeah. So it depends. If it's a critical API, then you probably go with the persistent. Yeah. Otherwise, you could use the in memory. Yeah. All good. So yeah. So I'll get back to you with that API manager policy. I don't know. It was working fine before I slept last night. I don't know what happened. So the okay, is there other mechanism to improve performance in addition to caching? With the performance, I guess it boils down on how you design things first. That's very critical, and how you implement that using different components of MuleSoft. But yeah, part of it is caching. I'm not sure with other options. Maybe other people could could provide feedback on what other options they use in MuleSoft to improve the performance. Yeah. Yeah. So just feel free to drop in, any feedback about that. But yeah. Okay. So benefits of an API caching, of course, it's easy to configure. And like what I've said, it's supported for all deployment targets. I guess with the customer hosted, it's not. Yeah, I believe it's not. So it's for Cloud Hub, Hybrid, and Runtime Fabric only. Um, yeah, and then ability to cache APIs dynamically using data weave expression, which is really good. So like what I did for the header injection policy, you could utilize the crypto library. And then, yeah, the rest extensions are fully supported by custom policy, easily skip and purge cache dynamically using header control. So yeah. Also, hang on, I think I forgot something. 1 second. Uh, oh yeah, so I forgot something very important. Yeah, so this expires and cache control here. So by default, it's not there. So you have to tweak that in the code. So expires, it's when it's when the resource gonna be valid till, and the cache control is the time to leave that you've set. So that's based on the REST standards, and it's already in our exchange. So when you use the trait, cacheable trait, then there would be a description there. So how you're gonna do that in your MuleSoft, I'll show you. Sorry, I forgot that. Yeah. So in your API, in Appleton Studio, so go to the responses. So in your listener, yeah. See, it's slow, the Endpoint Studio. My Endpoint Studio is still waking up, so bear with me, guys. Yeah, so
All right,
here,
Mary.
so I've set it here. So I just set now plus 6 seconds, and then format it in the HTTP way, and then the cache control I've configured a 6 seconds, so that's 6,000 milliseconds. Yeah, so just have to put that here in your header, as just following the REST standard. Cool. So now back to the slide.
That was great, Mary. Nikhil is
Yeah,
asking
don't
one
forget that,
question.
guys. Yeah, don't forget that HTTP headers. Okay, key takeaways. Of course, the bandwidth, you're saving the processing power while calling the downstream. Hence, you're not paying for the bandwidth. And then opportunity costs like processing time that could be used for other purposes, which actually a big bump when you implement the HTTP. I mean, when you implement the caching on your API. Yeah. So yeah, we're reached at the end now. So if you have any question, feel free to reach out through any of my channels. And yeah, so any questions?
So we have three questions as of now. One from Nikhil, up to how much size of payload data we can cache?
Up to how much size of payload data we can cache? You mean the size of the payload? No, I don't think there's a limitation around that. But with the number of entries in object store, you could set a limit with that. But with the size of the payload, no, I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think there's a limit until it says in the object store that there's a limit for the value. No, I'm actually not sure, but I don't think so.
One question from Sudhir. Based on response, can we tell whether the response came from backend system or the cache?
I've noticed that in the logs, there's like a sorry, there's um words there. There's words there that it's coming from the HTTP caching. So that's what I could see. That's one thing I've noticed.
Are you okay, Mary, if I can paste your LinkedIn URL in the chat because people are
Ah,
asking
yeah,
for it?
sure. Yeah, so here you go. How does a third-party cache provider perform as compared to Object Store? Is there a performance difference between the two? Well, definitely there would be because the Object Store is already in your, in your Anypoint platform or in your runtime plane. So it's easy to access that. Though I haven't tried to use a different tool in apart from the object store, but yeah, of course there's gonna be, because if it's sitting like on a different infrastructure, imagine the bandwidth. So yeah, I think using object store is better. Any business use case where we use API caching policy? Hang on. In API manager and then cache scope and MuleFlow. Um, I can't think of any use case that I've used both of this. Yeah, if any one of you, from the participants, came across on that setup, yeah, feel free to share your story about that. But yeah, I guess I'm just trying to understand like what could be the use case of having both policy. I think the yeah, the only thing I could think of is when you are caching a different keys. So for example, in your API manager, you are caching a request path, right? And then in your API implementation, for example, you are retrieving a database, response, database records. So you've got a different story there, not coming from your request, but inside what's happening in your Mule API. So for example, you wanted to retrieve records from database. So retrieving the record from database is just part of your full API transaction that's happening on your Mule API. So in that way, you could both use the API manager and the cache scope inside your Mule API. Oh, yep. There you go. Thanks, Ravi. The total size of an object store is not limited, but each value is limited to 10 MB. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I haven't checked the documentation object store, but yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ravi. So for yeah, the person who asked about the limitation of the object store, then yeah, that's it. But users are not aware if it's from cache or bank. I understand users not inserted about. You could actually see that in the logs. Um, yeah, so they actually don't mind, right? The API consumer, they don't mind if whether it's coming from cache or coming from the back end. So what they only care about is the performance. Yeah. And one thing you could notice as well is the response time. Yeah. So it means one use case can be caching any third party response in MuleSoft using the actual IP. All right. Well, I think that's not a question. The
Yeah,
restricting
that's
coming
right.
case. Yes, based on any particular header. Yes, exactly. Thank you, team, for this meetup. It's very helpful. Cool.
Thank you.
All
Thank you so
right.
much for liking it, Animesh. Thank you.
All right. So should
So,
we proceed now, Niraj?
yeah, sure, Mary. Let me stop the recording.
Cool. Thanks.